He wasn't supposed to live. Not after the crash. Not after they pulled him from his mother's broken body in a field of twisted metal. And yet, he did. Paralyzed, silent, alive, but unreachable. For 3 years, not a smile, not a sound. Doctors came, experts flew in. They said the same thing. There's nothing left inside. Then one afternoon, Alexander walked into the house, and what he saw stopped him cold. The Hill estate was quiet, but not the kind of quiet that brings peace. It was the silence of absence, of prayers unanswered, of a man who had stopped believing anything good could still grow. 3 years earlier, everything changed in a moment. A rain-slick road, a curve taken too fast. A car flipped, crushed beyond recognition. Inside was Lauren Hill, 8 months pregnant. By the time they got her out, she was gone. No heartbeat, no breath. But in a moment that can only be called divine, a group of passing soldiers managed to save the baby. David Hill was born on the side of the road, in the wreckage of what should have been the end. But his first cry never came. And for years after that, nothing did. No movement, no words, no signs of life beyond the machines that kept him breathing. Alexander, broken and buried in grief, did what powerful men do. He tried to fix it. He hired the best, flew in specialists from every continent, built a schedule of treatments, therapies, and strategies. But no one could reach the boy. Until her, Christina Baker. A maid. No credentials, no clipboard. Just a steady voice, a soft presence, and a faith that somehow refused to leave the room. Before we begin, if you believe God still works through ordinary people, if you've ever felt His presence in the quiet, or if you've ever loved someone the world had already given up on, then like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share in the comments where you're watching from, and what you believe about miracles, because sometimes healing doesn't come through science. Sometimes it comes through the hands of someone who simply refuses to walk away. The house was still, not just quiet still, not the kind of stillness you get from peace, but the kind that lingers after too many years of grief. The kind of stillness that settles in your bones when you've stopped expecting anything to change. Alexander Hill pushed open the front door without thinking. It clicked softly behind him. No voices, no footsteps, just the familiar hush of marble beneath his shoes and the distant hum of the machines in his son's room. He was home early. The board meeting had ended with numbers and noise, but none of it stayed with him. Lately, nothing did. He loosened his tie and stepped into the foyer. And then, he stopped. Right there, frozen. His eyes landed on the one thing he had trained himself not to hope for. His son. Walking. Unsteady, wobbly, but walking, across the wide expanse of the hallway floor, tiny feet slapping softly against the marble, arms open, face glowing, and the smile. God, the smile. It wasn't random. It wasn't forced. It was full, real, directed at someone just beyond his field of vision. Then came the sound. A word, a whisper. Tina. It came out fragile, almost floating, but unmistakable. A name. Alexander's briefcase slipped from his fingers and hit the floor with a dull thud. He didn't flinch. He didn't move. Across from his son, kneeling on the floor in a Navy uniform, was the maid. Christina Baker. She wasn't touching him. Just holding space. Her arms open, her eyes shining, her whole being lit up like she was watching the sunrise after years of rain. She said nothing. Just waited. Present, still, certain. And somehow, that was enough. David took one more step. Then another. And then he fell gently into her arms. Giggled. Rested his head on her shoulder like he'd done it 100 times before. And Alexander, the man who had spent 3 years building a fortress around his heart, stood in his own house and couldn't breathe. He blinked, thinking maybe it wasn't real. Maybe it was a flicker of light, a trick of memory, some buried dream. But it wasn't. He heard it again, this time softer, but clearer. Tina. A name. Not assigned, not rehearsed. Chosen. And the boy wasn't looking for his father. He wasn't reaching for a therapist, or a nurse, or the million-dollar machines lined up beside his bed. He had walked. To her. The woman Alexander had barely spoken to. The maid who was supposed to clean the house, not change it. He didn't know how long he stood there. Could have been seconds, could have been hours. But something had shifted inside him. Something that had been cold for a long time had just cracked open. He stepped back slowly, letting the moment stay untouched. The door closed behind him with a soft click, and for the first time in years, the silence didn't feel safe. It felt unfamiliar, alive. He moved down the hallway, his steps slower now, measured, careful, like he wasn't sure if he was still walking through his own house, or stepping into a story he wasn't ready to believe in. A faint hum drifted from the nursery. Not a machine, not a monitor, a voice. Low, steady, singing. Not for performance, not for therapy, just a lullaby. Simple, soft, spoken like a prayer. He paused outside the room and listened. For a long time, he had believed God had left them. He'd buried his name alongside his wife's. But now, standing in this hallway, with the sound of his son's laughter echoing down the walls, he wasn't so sure anymore. Maybe God hadn't left. Maybe he'd just sent someone they weren't expecting. Not a specialist, not a miracle worker, just a woman with quiet hands and a heart that refused to give up on a boy who hadn't even learned how to reach. And now, he was reaching. The Hill estate was built to keep things in and to keep things out. 4 stories tall, tucked behind black iron gates, it sat like a monument to silence on the edge of the city, all glass, steel, and stone. No laughter echoed down the halls. No music played from the rooms. Even the light felt expensive, but cold. Alexander had designed it that way. After the funeral, after the casket was lowered, after the news stories faded, he didn't want reminders. Not of Lauren, not of hope, not of the family that would never be. So he made the house sterile, controlled, predictable. It was the one thing he still had control over. Every surface wiped twice. Every schedule monitored to the minute. He installed oxygen backups, therapy equipment, 2 live-in nurses, and a private pediatric ICU on the 2nd floor. No clutter, no mess, no sound. But all the silence in the world couldn't drown out the ache of what wasn't there. David's room sat in the west wing. Wide windows, temperature-regulated floors. A state-of-the-art hospital bed built custom. Machines lined the wall like soldiers. They blinked and beeped and sighed through the night, reminding Alexander that his son was still alive. But barely. The boy had never laughed, never reached for anything. He spent most days staring past the people trying to save him, as if he wasn't sure whether he'd actually made it into this world or not. Alexander told himself it wasn't personal. The doctors said not to expect emotion. They told him David might never know who he was, so he stopped trying to make a connection. He focused on progress charts instead, on results, scans, second opinions. It hurt less that way. Then, quietly, someone new showed up. Christina Baker. No announcement, no orientation. Just a name added to the payroll and a note from the estate manager. New cleaning hire, good references, quiet type. Alexander didn't notice her at first. That wasn't unusual. Most staff moved through the house like shadows, polite, efficient, invisible. Christina was no different. Black woman, early 30s, simple uniform. She moved gently, spoke only when spoken to, and never lingered. She wasn't hired to be noticed. But David noticed. Not right away, but slowly, subtly. One morning, Alexander passed the nursery and caught something odd. The curtains were open. The light was softer. There was music faint, like someone humming. Not from the speakers, from a voice. He paused, but didn't step in. The next day, he walked past again. Books had been left out on the chair. Toys arranged not in rows, but in little piles like someone had actually been playing with them. He checked with the nurses. No one claimed it. Then he saw her. Christina, sitting cross-legged on the floor beside the crib, reading softly from a children's book, even though David didn't move. At first, he said nothing. He watched. Quietly, from a distance. He told himself she was wasting time, that the boy couldn't hear her, that whatever she thought she was doing wasn't real. But she didn't stop. Day after day, she showed up, folded laundry while singing under her breath, cleaned the windows while humming lullabies, brushed the boy's hair like he could feel every stroke. It wasn't loud. It wasn't grand. But something in the room had changed, and Alexander felt it. Late one night, unable to sleep, he opened the baby monitor footage out of habit. He'd stopped watching it regularly, most nights were uneventful. But this time, he saw something different. David's eyes were following her, tracking her as she moved across the room. His fingers twitched when she got close. His breathing steadied when she whispered. Christina didn't seem aware. She just kept speaking, like she was holding space for something invisible. "It's okay, sweetheart," she said gently, brushing his forehead. "You don't have to do anything. Just rest. I'm right here." Alexander sat back in his chair, stunned. It wasn't therapy. It wasn't science. It wasn't even measurable. But it was presence. The next morning, he asked one of the nurses quietly, "Has he ever responded to her?" She paused, then nodded. "More than anyone else," she said softly. "We weren't sure if you wanted to know." He didn't answer, because he didn't know. By the end of that week, the nursery looked different. Still clean, still quiet, but softer. There was warmth now, in the way the light fell across the rug, in the way David's eyes lingered a little longer, in the small cloth-bound notebook Christina kept near the crib. Inside were pages of handwritten notes, observations, reactions, moments, things no one else had thought to write down. She wasn't tracking data. She was bearing witness. And that's when something began to shift in Alexander Hill. Not all at once, but like a hallway slowly filling with light. He still didn't understand what was happening. He still didn't want to call it faith. But deep down, somewhere past all the grief, he knew. This woman wasn't just cleaning his house. She was tending to something sacred, something every expert had missed. Christina Baker never expected to be seen. She'd been in the house for 7 weeks. No one really spoke to her. Not the nurses, not the therapists, not even Mr. Hill. She didn't mind. She hadn't come to be noticed. She came to do the job clean, quietly, respectfully. But from the moment she stepped into David's room, she knew something was wrong. Not just with the machines or the silence. Not just with his tiny limbs curled stiff against the mattress, but with the air. It felt hollow, like everyone had already given up, like the house itself was holding its breath. That first day, she had paused in the doorway, mop in hand. David lay still, eyes half open, facing the window. She whispered a simple greeting. "Hi, baby." His eyes didn't move, but she spoke again anyway. "It's okay if you don't talk back. I'll still talk to you." And she did. Every day, after that. While folding sheets. While wiping windows. While sweeping the corners no one ever looked at. She didn't ask for permission. She just showed up. Again, and again, and again. In her bag, she kept a small notebook, leather-bound, worn at the edges. It wasn't for work. It was for him. She wrote down everything. Every flicker, every blink, every twitch of his hand when she spoke near him. She wasn't sure what it meant. But she believed something was waking up. Not because of her, but because she was willing to be still long enough to listen. One morning, she found a notebook behind the bookshelf in the nursery. Old, dusty, nearly falling apart. Inside the handwriting of a woman she'd never met. Lauren Hill. The pages were filled with prayers. Letters to a baby she hadn't held yet. A lullaby she'd written in the final month of her pregnancy. "If you ever forget my voice," it read, Let this song remind you that I was here, that I loved you before I ever saw your face. Christina traced the words with her fingers. Then, quietly, she began to hum the tune. That afternoon, David blinked. Once, twice. Then again when she sang it near him. She leaned closer. "You know that song?" she whispered. His fingers curled slightly. She didn't call the nurses. She didn't log it in the system. She just sang the lullaby again. Not loud. Not for results. But like a prayer. Alexander passed by the door later that evening, paused for a moment, watched as Christina sat beside the crib, humming softly, a book open in her lap. He didn't say a word, but she felt him watching. That night, she wrote in her notebook, "He looked at me today. I think he's starting to remember this world." The next day, the shift became undeniable. David followed her voice when she moved across the room. His hand twitched when she brushed past the mobile above his bed. His breathing deepened when she touched his shoulder. And then a sound. Not a word. Not quite. But a low murmur. A broken breath shaped like something trying to be spoken. Christina froze. Tears rose before she could stop them. She reached down, her hand resting on his. "You're not alone," she whispered. "You've never been." Alexander heard it on the baby monitor later that night. He replayed the clip 5 times. Then again, a noise. From David, directed at her. He stormed into the nursery the next morning, not angry, but rattled. Christina was stacking books on the shelf. She turned calmly when he entered. "Did you teach him that?" he asked, eyes sharp. "No," she said softly. "I didn't teach him anything. I just showed up." He made a sound. "Yes." He stared at her, unsure what to feel. His voice cracked a mix of confusion and something he hadn't let himself feel in years. "Why you?" Christina stepped forward, voice gentle. "I think children know when someone sees them. Not with eyes, with spirit." He didn't answer. But he didn't walk away either. That evening, Christina found David's baby monitor disconnected. She didn't ask why. But the next day, Alexander stood in the corner of the nursery longer than usual. He didn't say a word, didn't try to interfere, just watched her sing. And for the first time, he didn't see the maid. He saw the woman who had stayed. The one who had shown up, even when the rest of the world had walked away. The house was quiet, but not like before. There was something inside the stillness now. A tremble, like the walls were waiting for something to happen. It had been 2 days since David made that sound. 2 days since Alexander had watched, in disbelief, as his son, the boy he was told would never speak, tried to shape a word. Not with intention, not perfectly, but clearly, for someone. For her. Christina hadn't mentioned it since. She didn't bring it up, didn't celebrate, didn't make it about her. She just kept showing up. Each morning, she folded his pajamas into soft rectangles. She opened the curtains just a little more. She sang the same lullaby with the same quiet reverence, as if she were singing it to heaven itself. And David responded, not with full words yet, but with presence. His fingers stretched toward her when she got close. His chest rose and fell in rhythm when she whispered. And sometimes, just for a second, he smiled. Alexander didn't know what to do with any of it. He wasn't angry. He wasn't grateful. He was afraid. Because this wasn't what the doctors promised. This wasn't what the money was for. There was no science behind lullabies. No research study in gentle hands and quiet prayers. No measurable data in presence. He stood at the nursery door longer now. Sometimes just outside the frame. Sometimes in full view. He watched the way Christina looked at his son. Not with pity, not with fear, but with faith. And it made something ache in him. Something deep. Something old. One night, long after everyone had gone to bed, Alexander sat in his late wife's music room. The piano was still covered with a cloth. Her journal sat on the shelf, undisturbed. Everything was where she'd left it. He opened the notebook, turned the pages slowly. The ink had faded, but her words were still alive. Lyrics. Melodies. Notes to a child she never got to meet. I hope you love softly. I hope you find someone who sees you. And when you forget who you are, I hope a song reminds you. He closed the book and rested it on his lap. The silence in the room felt different now. Not empty. Just waiting. The next morning, it rained. Hard. Wind against the windows. Thunder in the distance. David was restless. His eyes darted toward the storm, his breathing shallow. Christina stayed close. She held his hand, hummed to calm his nerves. And then, he said it. Ma. It came like a breath. Soft, cracked, barely formed. But it wasn't a sound. It was a word. Christina froze. Tears filled her eyes before she could stop them. Her hand went to her mouth. Across the hall, Alexander heard it. He didn't rush in. He walked. Slowly. Carefully. Like he was approaching something holy. He stepped into the room. David was looking at Christina. His mouth open, trying again. Ma. Not loud. Not clear. But real. Alexander stood still, eyes locked on his son. He hadn't heard that word in 3 years. Not since the night Lauren died. He's naming you, he whispered. Christina didn't speak. She just nodded, tears falling freely now. Not out of pride. Not out of surprise. But out of love. He knows who I am, she said softly. The room held its breath. Even the storm outside seemed to still. And in that silence, something broke open inside Alexander. Not all the way. Not yet. But a crack. Big enough for light to come through. Later that night, Christina found him standing by the nursery door again. This time, he didn't look away. Do you think she'd be proud? He asked, voice hoarse. Christina turned to him, gently. I think she'd be grateful. He still remembers how to love. Neither of them spoke for a while. They just stood in the quiet, listening to the soft sound of David's breathing. And, somewhere deep inside the house, in the space where grief had made its home, hope was making its way back in. They called it an anomaly. The sound David made, the way his eyes followed her, the movement in his fingers when Christina touched his hand. Dr. Kent flew in from Sweden 3 days after the incident. Alexander had sent the footage, the monitor logs, even a full report handwritten by the nurses. Kent reviewed it all from behind wire-rimmed glasses, his tone professional, even polite. But when he looked up, the verdict was clear. It's not language. It's not motor progress. What is it then? Alexander asked. A reflex, Kent said, without flinching. Emotional mimicry. A neurological echo, perhaps. Nothing reliable. Alexander didn't speak. Not immediately. But something inside him tightened. Not in anger, in disappointment. Because Kent wasn't wrong. He just wasn't right. The room was quiet after he left. Christina stood by the hallway window, watching the wind stir the trees. She didn't ask what the doctor said. Alexander leaned against the doorway, his voice low. He says it's just a reaction, reflexive, meaningless. She didn't turn. Do you believe that? He didn't answer. He looked at her hands. Gentle, steady. The kind of hands that didn't need data to do something sacred. I used to believe in results, he said quietly. Now I don't know what to believe. Christina looked at him then. Not with judgment, with empathy. You don't have to name it yet, she said. Just don't walk away from it. That night, David didn't sleep well. He whined when the nurses approached, refused the bottle, turned his face to the wall. It was Christina who calmed him. No medicine, no monitor. Just her hand on his back and a whisper in his ear. You're safe. I'm right here. Alexander watched from the hallway, arms crossed. Every instinct in him said to interrupt, to take control. But his feet wouldn't move. He just stood there. Frozen, broken, open. Later, in his study, he pulled out the old photo album Lauren had made. It smelled like her perfume. Faint, floral, fading with time. Page after page sonograms, notes from prenatal checkups, letters to Baby Hill. And then, a photo. One he had forgotten. Lauren at the piano, one hand on her belly, the other stretched across the keys. She was smiling, eyes closed, alive. He ran his thumb along the page and whispered to the empty room. He said, "Mama, to someone who wasn't you." And it felt right. And I don't know what to do with that. The silence didn't answer, but something stirred in his chest. Not guilt. Not shame. Something closer to surrender. The next morning, the therapy center called. They'd seen a clip of David reaching. They wanted to evaluate him, in person. They also mentioned Christina. One of the center's executives had heard about her. "She has a gift," they said. "We'd like to offer her a full-time role, triple her salary, full housing, clinical training. She's a rare find." Alexander didn't respond. He hung up the phone slowly. His fingers stayed curled around the receiver long after the call ended. Down the hall, David was laughing. Laughing. Not just a noise. A sound with spirit. Christina was making animal noises behind a stuffed giraffe. David reached for it with both hands. His head tilted back, his mouth wide, and Alexander watched with quiet disbelief. It wasn't therapy. It wasn't intervention. It was something else. Something the doctors never brought into the room. That evening, he found Christina sitting by the garden, notebook open on her lap. She didn't look up as he approached. "They called me," he said. "The center?" she asked softly. He nodded. "They want to offer you a job, full-time, more than I pay, a whole career." She closed the notebook gently, stared out at the trees, swaying in the dusk. "I didn't apply," she said. "You don't have to explain." "But I thought about it," she added. He didn't speak. "I came here to clean floors," she continued. "But then I saw him, and I couldn't walk away." Alexander's throat tightened. "Are you going to leave?" She didn't answer right away. Then, quietly, "He's not mine." He looked at her. Really looked. For the first time, he saw the woman who had poured herself into someone else's child, with no guarantee, no spotlight, no reward. Just love. Quiet, faithful, free. He walked back to the house, went straight to his office, opened the drawer, and pulled out a folder. Inside, a legal document. Partial guardianship. Flexible terms. No traps. Just an open door. Christina found the folder on the kitchen island the next morning. No note. No explanation. Just a line drawn softly in the sand. Stay. Not as a maid. As someone who matters. It rained the night it happened. A steady, low hum against the glass. The kind of rain that didn't shout. It lingered. Soft, persistent. Like it was trying to wash something clean. Christina was in the nursery, humming under her breath. Same lullaby, same rhythm. She didn't look tired, but something in her eyes had changed. She moved a little slower, didn't linger as long. When she picked David up, it was careful, not casual. Alexander noticed. Even David noticed. He reached for her more that day, held her sleeve tighter when she tried to lay him down, watched her like he was afraid she'd disappear when he blinked. And then, in the middle of the thunder, he said it. "Tina." Clear, soft, real. Christina froze. Her hands dropped slowly to her sides. Her eyes welled, but no tears fell. She looked at him like her heart was breaking in the most beautiful and terrible way. Alexander stepped into the room just as she whispered back, "I'm here." That night, she didn't stay as long. She folded his blanket neatly, placed her notebook in her bag, and left without a word. Alexander stood by the window, watching her silhouette cross the driveway under an umbrella. And for the first time, it struck him. She was leaving differently. Not just the house. She was beginning to leave him. The next morning, David was quiet. No smiles, no giggles, just silence. He lay on the rug where he and Christina usually played, staring at the door. The nurses noticed. Tried toys, music, sensory games. Nothing worked. He didn't cry. He just withdrew. The light in his eyes dimmed, like something he couldn't explain was slipping away. Alexander watched from the hallway, and for the first time in his life, he felt helpless in a way that money couldn't fix. He found her in the kitchen later that night. She was packing something into a paper bag, small, quiet movements. "You're thinking about leaving," he said. She didn't jump. She didn't deny it. "The offer's still on the table," she said quietly. "But I made one too." "I know." She closed the bag gently, rested her hands on the counter. "You've been kind, more than you had to be. But this—" She paused. "This wasn't part of the plan." Alexander stepped closer. "He called your name." Her voice trembled. "That's what scares me." He didn't understand. "Why?" She finally looked at him. "Because he's starting to believe I'll always be here." The words hit deeper than he expected. "And you won't?" he asked. Her face softened, but the answer was honest. "I don't know. Do you want to leave?" A long silence followed. Then, barely above a whisper, "No, but sometimes wanting isn't enough." He leaned on the counter, hands gripping the edge. "I built this house to protect him. Every inch, every protocol. I did everything I could. I know. And none of it mattered, not until you walked in." She didn't smile. She didn't flinch. Maybe he didn't need protection. Maybe he just needed to be seen. He went quiet. The rain picked up again, harder this time, falling like it had something to say. Later that night, he found the paper bag she left on the table. Inside was the lullaby, Lauren's handwriting, folded neatly beside a note in Christina's hand. "He remembers her voice because you let her stay in this house. He found mine because I stayed when no one asked me to. But love like this can't live in limbo forever." He walked down the hall, stopped outside David's room. The boy was asleep, arms wrapped around the stuffed giraffe Christina had given him. His chest rose and fell slowly. But even in sleep, he looked like he was waiting. Alexander stayed at the door long after midnight, and for the first time, he didn't ask what to do. He asked what he was willing to lose. The house felt different now. Not louder, not warmer, just honest. The kind of stillness that follows after something sacred has been said out loud. Not broken, but open. Christina came to work the next morning. No bags, no announcements. Just her, moving through the house with the same quiet grace, the same soft voice. But something had shifted. Alexander noticed it when she passed him in the hall. She nodded, polite, present, but her eyes didn't linger. There was no coldness, no anger, only space, like she was giving him room to decide what kind of man he wanted to be. David noticed it too. He didn't laugh that day, didn't babble or stretch his hands as much. He stayed near the window, tracing the fog with one finger. Waiting. Christina didn't force it. She didn't try to reclaim his attention. She sat with him on the floor, soft music humming in the background. Read aloud even when his eyes wandered. Sang the lullaby even when he didn't respond. She had never come for results. She came to love him, whether or not he reached back. Alexander spent most of the day in his office. The guardianship folder sat unopened beside him, still unsigned. The pen lay next to it, like a quiet dare. He stared at the paperwork, line after line of legal language designed to offer structure, security, permanence. But no contract could define what Christina had become to his son. She wasn't his mother. She wasn't his nurse. And yet, when David said her name, he said it like it meant safety, like it meant home. By afternoon, Alexander found himself outside the nursery again. He didn't step in, just stood at the edge of the doorway, watching. Christina was drawing with David on the rug. Large crayons, simple shapes, a sun, a tree, a crooked house. David looked up and made a soft sound. Not a word, not yet. But intent was there. Christina smiled at him. "It's okay," she said. "You don't have to say everything. I already know." Alexander felt the weight of those words settle in his chest. He realized how long it had been since anyone said something like that to him. Later that night, he passed the kitchen. She was there again, wiping down the counter, slow and thoughtful. He walked in, quiet. "I saw the drawing," he said. She turned slightly, unsure where he was going with it. "He drew a house," Alexander continued, "and a stick figure with curly hair. That's you, right?" She smiled softly. "He didn't tell me. He doesn't have to." There was a pause. Full. Fragile. Then Alexander placed something on the island. The guardianship folder. This time signed. "It's not everything," he said, "but it's something. Something real." She didn't touch it. Not yet. She looked up at him slowly. "Why now?" she asked. His answer came without hesitation. "Because when he reaches for you, it's the only time I know he feels safe, and I've spent 3 years trying to give him that, but you already have." "This isn't just a job, Alexander," she said gently. "This is a life." "I know. And once we say yes to that, we can't go back." "I don't want to." He looked at her. Not as an employer. Not as a man trying to fix something. Just a father. A man who had failed to keep love alive, and was now being given a second chance. She reached for the folder. Not with haste. Not with fear. She just laid her hand on it, quietly, and nodded. The next day, the house began to change. Curtains stayed open. The hum of machines was joined by faint laughter. Toys were left where David last played with them. Books, half finished. Drawings taped gently to the fridge. Life wasn't being kept under glass anymore. It was being lived clumsily, honestly, beautifully. That evening, they had a picnic in the garden. Just the 3 of them. No celebration. No photographers. No staff. Christina baked a cake. David smashed it with both hands. Alexander laughed without thinking. Really laughed. It was uneven, awkward, like a man learning how to breathe again. At one point, a neighbor leaned over the fence. "Are you the nanny?" they asked Christina. Before she could respond, David waddled up with frosting on his cheeks and sticky hands outstretched. "Mama," he said, loud, clear. Without hesitation, Christina froze. Alexander looked at her. No words, but in his eyes, "Thank you." It was quiet again, not the silence of grief, not the hush of a house holding its breath. This was a different kind of quiet. Soft, living, awake. The kind that exists in early mornings, before the world remembers to be afraid. 1 week had passed since the picnic, since David looked up, hands covered in frosting, and called her Mama. Since Alexander stood in the garden, stunned, and didn't correct him. He hadn't said the word himself, but he didn't have to. In his eyes, it was already true. Inside the nursery, the room had changed. Not dramatically, just enough. Toys weren't arranged anymore. They were left where David had dropped them. Books stayed open, mid-story. Drawings curled slightly on the wall where the tape didn't quite stick. There was life now. Messy, beautiful life. Christina arrived early that morning. She moved quietly, as always. But there was something new in the way she walked. Not hesitation. Not doubt. Readiness. Alexander was already at the table. A mug of coffee in front of him. Cold. The folder sat between them. Guardianship papers. Finalized. Everything in order. She sat down without a word. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then she reached for the pen. Her hand didn't tremble. She signed her name. Slow, steady. A single act that carried the weight of something holy. She didn't look at him, but she smiled. Later that afternoon, Alexander stood outside the nursery door. David was sitting on the rug, stacking blocks with full concentration. Christina sat beside him, her legs crossed, head tilted, humming softly. David looked up and pointed. "Tina," he said, grinning. Then, without thinking, he climbed into her lap. She wrapped her arms around him like it was the most natural thing in the world. Alexander's chest tightened, not with fear, not with jealousy, but with something that felt like awe, because for the first time in years, his son had chosen someone, and someone had chosen him back. That night, they sat on the back porch. The sky was heavy with stars. David had fallen asleep an hour earlier, curled between his stuffed giraffe and the lullaby notebook. Alexander handed Christina a cup of tea. "You didn't have to say yes," he said. "I didn't," she replied. He glanced at her. "But you did." She nodded. "Because love is a choice, and I'd rather choose him with no guarantees than walk away with everything safe." The words hit deeper than he expected. "I don't think I ever chose him," he said. "Not fully. I loved him, but I was scared to love something that might leave me again." "He never asked you not to be scared," she said gently. "He just needed you to stay." They sat in silence for a while, the kind of silence that doesn't ask for anything. Then Alexander spoke again, barely above a whisper. "Do you think I failed him?" Christina looked straight ahead. Her voice came soft, but full of conviction. "No, I think you were broken. And broken people don't fail. They just take longer to heal." "And what about you?" he asked. "Are you healed?" She exhaled. "I think I stopped waiting to be." The next morning, something changed. It was subtle, but real. David stood without support. Just for a second. Just long enough to wobble in place, arms stretched toward the kitchen where Christina stood washing fruit. "Mama," he said, and then he laughed. It wasn't controlled, wasn't coaxed. It just came, full of joy, full of breath. Alexander stood behind him. He didn't rush forward, didn't call a therapist, didn't reach for his phone. He just watched and smiled. That night, he tucked David in himself. The machines were quieter now, less intrusive. David blinked slowly, fighting sleep. "Daddy," he murmured. The word was soft, still forming, but real. Alexander sat at the edge of the bed. "I'm here." David closed his eyes, and for the first time, he didn't stir when the lights dimmed. He just slept, peacefully. In the hallway, Christina waited. "He said, Daddy," she whispered. Alexander nodded. "He's choosing both of us." They stood there, just outside the door, surrounded by quiet. Not as a man and his maid, but as something closer to a family, still forming, still fragile, but real. And in the silence, hope didn't whisper. It stayed. It had been 6 months. The house didn't look like it used to. Curtains were always open now. Toys lived on the floor like they belonged there. Music floated through the halls, sometimes soft jazz, sometimes lullabies, sometimes just Christina's voice humming under her breath. The marble still shone. The machines still clicked in quiet corners. But the cold was gone. It had been replaced by something slower and alive. David was stronger now. He still needed help standing for too long, still struggled with words sometimes, but he laughed often. He reached. He sang pieces of songs when Christina made pancakes, and when she left the room, he always looked for her. The therapy center had followed up 3 times. Each time, Christina politely declined. She never raised her voice, never explained herself. She didn't have to. She had already made her choice. She stayed. One Saturday morning, Alexander walked out to the backyard with a mug of coffee in hand. The air smelled like spring. In the center of the garden, a new swing set stood adaptive, custom-designed, built with Christina's notes. David sat in the padded swing seat, giggling, legs kicking gently. Christina stood beside him, giving soft pushes, murmuring encouragement. The sun lit her curls like a halo. Alexander stood back, watching. Something about the scene made him still, not because it surprised him, but because it didn't anymore. A neighbor leaned over the fence. "Is she the nanny?" Christina turned, about to answer, but David beat her to it. He pointed, his voice loud, sure, proud. "Mama!" The word cut through the morning like a song. Christina's hands went still on the swing ropes. Her eyes widened, mouth slightly open. Then a smile broke through, wide and wordless. She looked at Alexander. He was already looking at her. He didn't say anything. Didn't need to. His face said everything. "Thank you. I see you. He's yours, too." Later that evening, After the sun had slipped behind the trees and the yard was quiet, they sat on the nursery floor, just the three of them. David leaned against Christina's side, eyelids heavy. One of his hands rested on Alexander's knee. The other curled around the edge of his blanket. The lullaby notebook was open beside them. A page, dog-eared. A corner torn from where David had once tried to eat it. No one was in a hurry to speak. Then Christina whispered, "Do you think she'd be proud of him?" The room held still. Alexander didn't answer right away. He looked down at the boy between them, at the small body once surrounded by machines, at the breath that now came freely. "I think," he said slowly, "she'd be proud of all of us." David stirred, murmured something soft. Neither word nor sound. Just trust. And in that moment, the nursery, once cold, once quiet, once guarded, felt like something else entirely. Not a hospital wing, not a waiting room for progress, but a home. They sat there a while longer, no need for words. Alexander's hand rested gently on Christina's. Not grasping, not asking, just there. And when he finally stood to turn off the light, he paused, looked back at the woman who was never meant to matter, at the child who had never been expected to live, and he realized they saved each other. No one spoke about titles anymore. There was no need. No one cared about contracts, resumes, roles. There was just a boy, a woman, and a father who finally understood that love is not earned with effort. It's built with presence, and chosen again and again. Outside, the wind moved softly through the trees. Somewhere in the dark, a swing creaked gently in the breeze. Inside, there was no noise, but it wasn't silence. It was peace. They weren't a perfect family, but they were a real one, and that was enough. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who still believes in quiet miracles. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell us below who's the one person that showed up in your life when the world thought all hope was gone. Because sometimes the ones who were never meant to matter are the ones who change everything.